Good evening, everyone. I'm Ian Rolston. I was tempted to say the virtual president of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, but I'm delighted for the first time in really rather a long time to be back in reality in the National Museum for this lecture in our main series. It's also being transmitted over the internet, and I'd like to welcome fellows and their guests, not only present in the room, but also distributed around the world from Australasia to North America. I'll shortly introduce the speaker. There will be an opportunity at the end of her lecture to ask questions. And for those of you who are working or following this over the internet, please use the chat facility in Zoom, and the director will pass on these questions. But first of all, I'd like to hand over to the director for his announcements.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my first time in the auditorium for, I think it is actually almost 2 years. I haven't been in here for ages. I have the minutes of the Society to read to you. The meeting of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland on Zoom on February the 7th, 2022. Ian Ralston, President of the Society, is in the chair. We had a lecture from Dr. Chernjeet Mann on Diversity is Not a Silo, Roots to Anti-Racist Work in Scottish Heritage. And this was followed by a question and answer session. I hope those are correct.
Everybody present? Yes, see signs of acknowledgement.
Thank you.
Are there any other announcements?
There's a couple of notices. I just wanted to say, first of all, that myself, I don't know which camera we're on, I don't know if we're on this camera, myself and Ian are both wearing the new Society ties that we will be putting out on sale next month. Keep an eye on our shop site for the opportunity to purchase these fantastic and quality items. And I think the Society Fellowship tartan has come out very nicely actually in the tie, and we'll have scarves as well. And the only other thing I was going to mention was that the next meeting of the Society is going to be on a Thursday, not a Monday, so please make sure you check that in your diaries. It's Thursday the 28th of April. And so just make sure that you check that before you come along. Thank you very much.
Well, now, fellows and guests, we pass to the main business of this evening, and I'm very grateful to Professor Annelou van Gijn for having come from Leiden, from the Netherlands, to give us this lecture this evening. So not only is this our first in-person session, it's also one which involves international travel, and we're very grateful to Professor van Gijn for having undertaken this and to have come to Edinburgh on this rather wet and dingy March afternoon. Professor van Gijn has worked primarily at the University of Leiden, where she finished her PhD, working in the materials laboratory and becoming a professor there some years ago. Her main interests have been in lithic tools and microware analysis and in archaeological experiments, but she's worked widely around the world. I notice that she's had the good fortune to work in the Caribbean, in Ireland, and in southern Scandinavia, amongst other places. So I very much look forward to Professor van Gijn's lecture this evening, and would like to welcome her to talk to us about connecting tools and materials in the Dutch Late Neolithic through use-ware analysis and experiments. Welcome.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here. 2 years ago, I was supposed to speak exactly 2 years ago, and that had to be cancelled because of COVID. So exactly 2 years later, I'm here actually. So also everybody out there in digital space, well, I hope you enjoy. Okay, I'm going to talk about the late Neolithic. And my interest has always been in small things forgotten, to cite a book of 1977, I think, by James Dietz. And I think there's way too much emphasis on gold and palaces and kings, especially in journalism, in archaeology. And so I think it's also very good to look at common folks, so to speak. And in archaeology, there's also been a lot of focus on pottery and flint. And one of my problems always was that people say, oh, I'm a pottery specialist, I'm a lithic specialist, whereas I think it's very important also to include organic materials and to integrate all these different material categories and look more have a more holistic way of looking at it, looking at toolkits, and looking at these object biographies and how they relate to each other. So this is an example of these tool biographies. It's Grand Pressigny daggers that were made from French flint in the region of Tours, south of Paris. They were made in a very special way. And so you first look for the raw material by provenance studies. Then you look for the technology, how are things made? Then how are things used by means of microanalysis, which has been one of the focus of my research the last years. And then last, of course, you have to put it in context. Whether it's, so when I'm speaking of useware traces, this is basically what we are looking at. We're looking at polish, at micro-retouch, little splinterings, striations, and rounding. These are general phenomena of wear, which of course are very common on flint, but most of these you can also see on all sorts of other materials. You can do useware analysis on pottery, on coral, on shell, etc., etc. We also try to look at residue, and we're not always capable of identifying which starch grains are there, but we do, when we look at objects and tools, we do look for ochre, for all kinds of other information than just these wear traces. Okay, how are we studying that? We're using a range of different microscopes, at least in the laboratory where I am working. Stereo microscopes, which we call low power, and you can get kind of a general idea of the hardness of the material, the motion executed. Then we use also a metallographic microscope, which generally is referred to as high power, and you can get more detailed inferences. For example, you can say it's a bone working tool. The scanning electron microscope is often used. Micro-CT scans, as you see here on this is a V-shaped button made with a micro-CT scan to look into the amber bead. And for residue analysis, we need also transmitted light, so a different kind of. Am I going too fast? No. Okay, so how are we doing this? We do a lot of experiments, and with all sorts of activities, and then the traces we see on these experimental tools, we compare empirically to archaeological traces. And there's all sorts of new techniques to quantify to some extent. I won't get into that. But in any case, this is basically how it works. The middle picture, one is archaeological, one is an experimental bone carving tool, as I'm doing here. And the interesting thing was that one of the first assemblages that I looked at was from the Vlamingen culture, which is the subject of my talk today. On many, many unretouched objects, we find wear traces. So this whole idea of what is a tool and what is not a tool, which we often make based on modification, on intentional making it, shaping it, is not always relative. We also know this for bone tools, like a manufacturing waste is often directly used as a tool. And the same for lithic unretouched materials. This is one from Matt. This Gundlinger Swartz, this is a student at Leiden University. And why I'm showing this is experiments that he's been having done by experienced sword fighters in order to be able to understand these kind of swords. But what is interesting is that the replicas and the archaeological traces, he can actually match them and relate them to specific motions, specific fighting methods that were done in the past. So it is, that's why experimental archaeology is so important for us in order to understand the range of all these traces and relate them to human actions, human activities, gestures, and so forth. So I was mentioning in the beginning already, that's this integral approach where we try to look at not only flint or not only pottery, but to try to relate them to each other. This started with me when I was basically, most materials that other people didn't want to look at were dumped on my table, like these funny little pieces of stone that nobody really cared for, bone tools that the archaeologist determined for age and species, but otherwise they weren't really interested in them. So, and here you see a toolkit that's related to fiber processing and making weaves of textiles, of plant materials. And this little thing is to sharpen these awls on this little sharpening tool. So you see this whole integration of these different kinds of tools made of all these different materials that together tell us a story about what people were doing in the past. So this interest in this toolkit approach, this biographical approach, led me to our building projects, which is basically what I'm going to talk about mostly today. We were, from Leiden University, we were interested in having a place for scientific experiments where we could make fire at will, we could cut down trees, we could do all these things that are generally forbidden in a city like Leiden, for example. And we needed to have a reference collection for our microware studies. And we really wanted to explore these toolkits, how different materials relate to each other, what kind of integrated Chenobratar we could distinguish. And we hooked up with the National Forestry Service in one of the big polders in the center of the Netherlands, where there is a very, very large wood, believe it or not, called the Horsterwold. It's the largest deciduous forest in Europe, they claim. It's deciduous, so it's. They were cut down a lot in their budget. They were looking for other ways of generating income. So they wanted to raise the awareness of what people could do and what you could eat in nature, and receive school classes, but also stressed CEOs were put in the house and could spend the weekend just living close to nature. So together we decided to get this project going. And so in 2012 we built our first house, and what we really wanted to do was to concentrate on the process. And of course the final product is nice, but it was the process that was really our focus. And to understand all this, the labor input, the materials, how many materials, where they're from, tools and people, and understanding these toolkits. And we also wanted to give students and volunteers, local volunteers, the chance to actually relate to all these kinds of tools, which is especially is a very different way of learning about archaeology when you actually have a stone axe in your hands than when you look at it in a more detached way. So doing something is a very, very important learning process. And we wanted to quantify all this stuff, and using only Stone Age tools. We didn't use any metal tools. And we were lucky that we were allowed to build this house without any security, normal security. In the first instance, they were asking us, where's the kitchen, where's the bathroom? And then we explained what we were doing. I said, no, there won't be a kitchen or a bathroom in this house. And they let us build it really the Stone Age way. Of course, you never know for sure how exactly this house looked like in the past, but we're trying different ways. Okay, so we were interested in the biography, so we actually documented an incredible amount of things, how many trees, how many posts from each tree, so the biography of the trees we have. We also have the biography of all the used tools, how long they were used and by whom, and so we could understand the useware better as well. So over the years, it became a small little cozy hamlet. We made boats, a dugout and a skin boat. We made different kinds of ovens there. We experimented, like here, we experimented with different kind of roofing techniques. And well, it was basically very basic. We didn't have mobile reception in the beginning. It was, when I advertised it for students, it was also, this is not for woosies, because we had no water, we had no electricity, no gas. This was our cooking place. This is exactly where we lived, and there was no showers or anything. So, but we really had groupies who loved the place. I think it was really, really nice. So school kids came, we had demonstrations, and we did, with our students, we did different kinds of experiments, like with fuel. And so a lot of different things happened there over the years. But this was in the center of Holland, and it was a house from the so-called Vlaardingen culture. Vlaardingen culture is a well, it's dated basically from 3400 BC till about 2500 BC. And people from Vlaardingen came and said, why building a house from the Vlaardingen culture in this polder? We want one too. So that's what we did. We built a house, this Vlaardingen culture house, also in Vlaardingen. And that's where we are now stuck with. We keep working there, much to the happiness, I think, of everybody involved. It's what we call in Dutch a burgerinitiatief. It's a polder which is heavily where dirty, the slip from the harbor of Rotterdam was dumped on this polder. And the idea was to make it into a housing estate, but of course that was absolutely out of the question because it was way too polluted. So the local people, the dog walkers, the joggers, they took over and they took possession of this polder and decided, and were given the authority to do with the polder what they liked. So, and some of them happened to be alumni of Leiden University, archaeologists, and they decided to build a open-air archaeological park called Massa Muda, very much related to the archaeology and the history of the Rhine-Meuse Delta. And so, we basically learned from the first house and we started to work here. And so this is the park as it's going to be. And this is going to be the little Vlaardingen village. And so here we're starting. These are my colleagues in crime, the two builders, Leo Wolterbeek and Diederik Pomstra. And so we're involved in this whole project. Okay, so we started to collect wood, and we actually built a frame, a bit like IKEA building package. So in 2015, we collected all the necessary wood, and then the year after, we put it all together. Here you see some of the pictures of this building process, and which we largely did with the students. And here are some counts. There's a lot of similarity in the amount of building material we used. The only real big difference is that we used a lot more reed. We used summer reed to cover the roof. And the roof turned out to be too thin in the Horsterwold in the first house. And so we made it a lot thicker. We used less loam. We were better at loaming and making wattle and dope walls. And for the rest, it's very similar. We made a few different. We didn't have smoke holes, so we only needed 4 deer skins for the doors, and we didn't, and not more. So it's, and the number of trees is a little less, partially because we knew more what we wanted. So we learned from the first house. So I mentioned already the summer reeds. This was a really experimental way of roofing. Basically, the reeds are at their longest, and you can bend them still, they don't crack. And so what we did is you make little bundles, you bend them and you put them across the rafters. The rafters, no, the lath, it's called. And that way you can really make a roof very, very fast. The collecting of the reed, however, is really a lot of work, and is very, very heavy work. Not very pleasant, because it's end of summer, beginning of the autumn. It can be very hot. There can be much mosquitoes, and it's endless. It's an endless job, and so we had our first strike doing that, actually. Other things also, not using metal tools really requires a bit more planning. You cannot just get your saw out and saw off a little piece of wood that's in the way or that sticks through your roof. So one way of doing that is by burning down, like you see here, putting wet mud on the piece that you want to preserve, and start burning this fork. We didn't want this fork; it was too long. So we burnt it away. Lime bark is really a spring thing. The saps have to be running. So that's usually about in May that you can harvest the lime bark, which for us was our main binding materials. And also the spring is a good time to cut, although you can basically cut trees most of the year, and we now think that the autumn may have been better. Okay, the working days, it's a lot of working days, over 300, and we used, but basically it's not really undoable for a small family. It's not heavy work. You can do it with a small family, maybe have a few people that are a bit stronger to put the center posts in, but in about 4 weeks, you can come a long way. And maybe they didn't build it in one go, but you can do it in phases. So it's not something that's hugely complicated, we have concluded. And another thing is that, the amount of tool use, we always think of tool use that is related to the building, but actually the amount of tool use was only a very minimal amount of time, actually. In the case of the Vleininga house, it was only 13.3% of the total working time involved tools. So the rest is handwork. So that is also something that we forget sometimes. We think of tools and relate this immediately to activities, but actually a lot of these activities actually do not involve tools at all. And this wasn't even involving getting the material, and so that's even on top of this. So this is even less if you think of moving material from one place to the next. Another thing that really struck us was how important wooden tools are. Incredibly important. And another thing we tend to forget as archaeologists, we're so focused on the material that's preserved that we forget that wood is also a lot of ad hoc tools that haven't even been modified, like a hook to raise the bundles of reed up to the roof, for example, but also little needles of wood. The digging sticks were very important. And we lost a lot of our wooden tools, because where do they end up? They end up in the fire. And so we miss, not only is it a question of preservation, but it's also a question that when a wooden tool, and certainly a wooden tool that has hardly been modified, but it's just been a piece of wood, they end up in the fire. Even for us, even when we try to be careful, we also burned some of our tools. So this is really something to realize. And the other thing that we were quite amazed about is that apart from the access, The other flint, the pieces of flint, where were they? Oh, here, this is 7.3% of the total time, but that's actually very, very little if you think of how much flint we have and how much focus there is on flint. So to us, this was important to realize that what we see in our archaeological assemblage is not very representative of what a toolkit in the past looked like at all. Another surprise was the efficiency of the quartzite and basalt axes in comparison to the flint tools. We are very much impressed with our flint axes, but they dull more quickly, they break more quickly, whereas these axes are really resilient, and we didn't have to resharpen them at all during a whole building season. And so, and the other thing is that they develop very little traces of wear. So it's actually, if you think of this little bit of polish here, and here hardly anything, and this is after 1220 minutes. It's nothing. And yeah, you would recognize it as use, but you would never think that this tool was used for so long. What we do see is the halfting traces. So they develop very, very quickly, and they develop much more intensively. So it's the halfting traces on these axes that tell us about the longevity of these tools and whether they were, how long they were, or, well, we can't really say how long, but they are much, much better developed. They give an indication of this, of the length of use. Bone adzes, we worked a lot with bone and antler tools, and they're efficient, and they develop a lot of wear traces, but you have to resharpen them all the time, thereby removing any traces that you can see. So again, you do not really see this represented in your archaeological assemblage and your microware, how long these things were used. The same for antler hose, for example, which we use to get the loam. They basically get shorter and shorter, these hose, and one of them is now about this long. It's totally not efficient anymore as a hoe for acquiring loam, but it shines a bit, but it's not really visible how much time was used with these things. So a toolkit for house building, that's pretty complicated. I'm not really sure we would ever be able to recognize that. And like we did, for example, for fiber and for basketry, you can do that much more easily. For a house building, I'm not so sure we can ever get at that. What was important to realize was how little flint flakes were used. Most flakes were used very briefly. They were picked up, used to cut something, and then rejected. So they were probably multifunctional with a range of different traces visible, but not always interpretable. I already mentioned that a lot of the tools we used were organic tools, and 65% of the tool use time at the Vleininga House was organic, concerned organic tools made of organic materials, wood, bone, antler, and they also have to be resharpened or did not survive. So again, we don't see them so much, and we don't recognize their importance in the toolkits that we can find. Well, the groundstone tools are very effective, but in the end, of course, we were happy because we got a lot of tools for our reference collection for our micro studies. So the experiences we had, cutting down these trees was far faster and easier than many of us had realized. You can cut a tree, an oak of about this circumference in 20 minutes is a piece of cake. I already said collecting reeds was horrible and painful and seemed like a never-ending task. Planning, essential, because you cannot really adjust very easily. The students, after a period of painful blisters and everything, actually learned very fast, and some became very proficient woodcutters. We noted who used which tool in these biographies. So we have in any case found that women preferentially used adzes, and that is this motion, whereas men preferred the axes, this more swinging motion. And we found that a lot of nature facts, a lot of ad hoc tools were used. So that was some of the findings. One of our students put all these data into a gigantic chaîne opératoire, so relating all the labor and the tools, and this is just a little part of his scheme. It's really, really impressive what Erik Kroon did, and we hope this year to get all this stuff published. Okay, well, at some point, the house, we were focused in Vlaardingen, the old house in the Horsterwold, the forestry service had different preoccupations, and we needed to really do some maintenance. As you can see in the right-hand picture, it's starting to really, the roof is very thin, needed a lot of repair. So we decided to burn it down as an experiment. And putting some stuff in the house, making it a living environment, so to speak. And but what we found is it's not so easy to burn down a house. You really have to do your best. And we always think, it's easy, but it's not. If you just burn your fire, normally nothing happens unless you lie half in it with your bedding or something. So we really had to make an extreme fire all the way to the top of the roof. And then it was what the fire people, a fire brigade was there. They said that was a rollover. Then it just went really, really, really fast. And so these are some pictures of the burning of the house. It was really sad to see it go, but it was also very interesting. We reached incredibly high temperatures, more than 1,000 degrees, which was very much to the surprise of the fire people. They hadn't expected that to happen. And this is the very sorrow and sad view of the house after it was burned. So we wanted to leave it alone for quite a while. This is a 3D scan after the burning made by Jari Pakane and Bam Brisbaert. And you see quite a bit still standing. But we had to excavate it, unfortunately, quite soon after, 3 months after the burning, because of the plans of the forestry service. So that's what we did. And a student at the moment is still busy. Is busy with describing the finds, and we have to collect all the data ready to write up. Okay, so, So then this led to a new research project, putting life into late Neolithic houses, which was a project started by the Dutch National Science Foundation, and what they wanted to do was to bring together archaeological companies, the commercial side of archaeology, the scientists, but also public partners, volunteers, museum people, local initiatives, and so we got a grant with this group of people. There's all sorts of people there. This person here is our woodman. He knows everything about wood. He's basically, that's Leo Wolterbeek. But there's also somebody like Caroline who knows everything about wood, not from a practical part of the story, but the more she knows everything about what was found. Okay, so what we want to do, it's a multidisciplinary team, and we focus on the Vlaardingen culture and the Rhine-Meuse area, which is circled here. So what we were thinking was that very often all these reconstruction drawings, they give a bird's eye view, and they don't really hone into people's hands and how people actually do things. So we really wanted to push the limits a little bit of our imagination to kind of get a little bit, use scientific data, but also input from people's grandfathers and from wherever we can find to really go a little bit further than what we normally would do. So there's a very important role for non-academics, for craft people in this project, their experiences and knowledge and opinions. And we want to really try to challenge some of the fixed ideas. And by involving people more, that non-archaeologists, and also relate more on emotion and experience, not so much always quantifying everything, but really getting closer to our materials. So, and we want, this is one important thing, and that's the visualization as an active research tool. So, and I will talk a little bit later about that, how we're using that. And so there's going to be quite a bit of high-tech research of artifacts, residue analysis in York University, and also provenance analysis, provenancing of different of the pottery. So a lot of different things. I will say a little bit more about it. So all these new data and our experiments, together with these the input of craftspeople, will be a departure point for these visualizations. And these visualizations, these reconstruction drawings and the blogs will be distributed across social media for criticism, and hopefully we get input to bring us further. And last but not least, we want to try to bring together all the great literature on the Vlamingen culture, which there's a lot. There's been a huge amount of work done on this period, but very little overviews, very few data have been brought together. So craft is one of the foci of the project, and one of the things we noticed is that there's quite a bit of variability in hide-working tools. So this is one of those toolkits that we tried different tools in the hide-working process. And so last summer we did a lot of different experiments with this, involving different kinds of tools and different kinds of stages of processing, dehairing quite a bit to see whether we could relate that to the traces we observe on the very, very large number of scrapers that we find in some of these Vlamingen sites. Tanning with animal fat and smoking. And in the meantime, we also teach, because these workshops are always given by people who know what they're doing, by craftspeople, and we invite the local volunteers to actually come and partake in these and learn how to do it, so that they can then again transfer all that knowledge to the school kids that come to the center. Okay, one of the nice things was that when we did all these dehairing experiments, we really wore out our scrapers very, very fast. We needed to resharpen them very, very regularly. And so we needed a flexible haft. And we collected all these little resharpening flakes and find, of course, also traces on that. And so this is something we try to quantify a little bit, how many times you need to resharpen and what happens to these tools. Another thing we are trying to focus on are the bone and antler working tools. We did some scanning electron microscope pictures of some of the experimental wool working and flax and hemp working tools, and we can see differences in the wear traces. So we hope to also work on some of the archaeological materials to maybe see a little bit more what kind of to know what kind of clothes could they have been wearing, because we know so little about what kind of material they were wearing, and so that's something we want to do and also learn a little bit about. maybe the basketry and so forth. So these more hidden aspects of their life, we try to get at that in an indirect way by pushing a little bit, like, of course these awls, these bone awls were used, but we would like to know whether it's flax or hemp, or flax or something else, or some willow bark, and so we try to be a bit more specific. This was a nice one. This was at the site of Den Haag Steinhof. We found quite a lot of very heavily rounded drills that fitted, like you see in the picture to the right, exactly into one of the, what we thought was a repair hole. And then one of the students last year, she did a whole series of experiments to see whether there were differences in the perforations that we think may be repair holes, and those that were linked to the decoration of the rim, which you frequently see on Vlaardingen pottery. And so to the left is one of the drill holes of a flint drill, and below the kind of traces, which you also see on that archaeological one. And indeed, there's a very clear difference in the kind of perforation that you get of the repair holes, which is these, for example, and the ones that are related to the holes that are at the rim and that are related to the decoration. And in here you have a straight perforation that is done when before the baking, when the pot was still leather hard, and these other perforations, they're made with the flint drills, much harder, and the pot is already baked, so you cannot really pierce through it. So there's a lot of difference in the tool that was used. In this case, a bone, or most likely actually a piece of wood, a thin stick of wood, which is perfectly suitable. And in these repair holes, clearly the flint tools which you actually find in this assemblage. So here you see all these these very rounded flint tools that were used for making these repair holes in the pottery, which is actually not so easy. It takes quite a bit of time to pierce a hole like that. Okay, so that is really related to recycling. Another recycling aspect that we found is the recycling of the broken polished flint axes. And currently we're building a dugout canoe, and it's pretty shocking how many of these flint axes actually break. It's even though some of these guys, they have been working on this for almost a year now, since June last year. They're pretty good, but they still break their axes. And so it's not surprising that in Vlaardingen context we find loads and loads of flint, of polished axe fragments. And so an experiment was done or several experiments actually, by Diederik Pomstra to see how these axes could be broken up. And then Lasse van den Dikkeberg, the PhD in this project, together with a student, Tatjana Kronbeen, they counted how many large, but also how much of this tiny, tiny debitage displayed still these polished surfaces to see whether you could still recognize it. And I don't know the counts. They are currently writing an article. So, but a lot of it is, of course, not visible. But it's good to see how much it could be. So this is one of the visualizations. It's not yet colored in, but this is by Kelvin Wilson. He's the one who is going to make most of our visualizations. He also has worked for Stonehenge, and I think some of you have probably seen his work. This still has to be colored, but you have the pots here that are being repaired. He's got a broken axe in his hand that's going to be further worked to flakes, to usable flakes. And so this is one of his first visualizations. We are also interested in food and how was food obtained, how were the grinding stones used, how were they prepared, how was food, what was in those pots. So there's going to be quite a bit of pottery research as well. One colleague is going to do the provenancing of the pots, also because there's a lot of interaction between the Vlamingen, coastal people, and the people inland, and we want to know a little bit more about that. And the contemporaneous pottery in the inland is already part of a study by some other researchers. Groningen University is busy with that, so it's really good to get the coastal material as well, to see how this interaction is between the so-called marginal people in the wetlands and the people further inland. So we're doing morphological studies, provenancing, microwear of the pottery, but also residue studies. And so we started some cooking experiments to get this kind of residue, to get the crusts that are going to be studied by Lucy Kubbiak to see whether she can find different plant remains by means of the scanning electron microscope. Here you see that she often finds like different rhizomes and root crops she can distinguish. And she is going to work closely with Oliver Craig from York University, who is going to do organic residue analysis. And so together, this combination is going to hopefully give us also insight into recipes, into what kind of combinations were cooked in these pots, because we get loads and loads of... the sampling has been done for 2 sites, and it's all currently under analysis. The wood is another focus because we are very intrigued. This is one of the tip of one of our digging sticks. This is a paddle found at Hekelingen, one of the sites of this culture. What is interesting is also that we get, with these digging sticks, we get very, very straight post holes, which you can make exactly the size of your post, which is completely different from what we find in our excavation plans. We find these kind of sloping post holes with a little bit in the bottom, but a lot of, and we now think that may be related to repair. So this coming weekend, next weekend, we're going to repair a house, the Vlamingen house, which has been suffering quite considerably from the big storm Unice that was a few weeks ago. The storm came from a very unfortunate angle and was very, very strong, and actually pushed the house from the side, so it's kind of dented and leans over. So this coming weekend, we're going to try to pull it back into its original position with ropes and forks. But what is interesting what is going to be interesting is also repairing all these broken posts, because some of the wall posts have broken, partially because they're rotten. That actually goes quite quickly too. So we are really looking at a different way at this house plan now, which contains a lot of posts, which I think partially are repair. They cannot all be, they most likely were not all contemporaneous. There was probably, so we're very interested in what is going to happen, because these post holes, the original post holes, are perfectly straight and very tight. And so when you have to get them out, you probably get these more sloping profiles. Okay, we collect the wood chips, of course, for the wood people, for Kirsti Hennenen and Caroline Vermeeren, who are going to relating the axes together. That's, of course, something that is also interesting and important to do. And then, last but not least, we consider technology and tools as very much part of the landscape. Often it's kind of 2 things, but technology, human technology, is part and parcel of the landscape and vice versa. So we actually were in this very water-rich environment last autumn with the whole team to also experience how it is. And you realize when you're with a multidisciplinary group, you start to talk about how do you move around in such a landscape. And because the volunteers were very interested in this aspect, we started with building a canoe. So for the past, since last June, local volunteers of Mosamuda have been building this canoe, and it's a long way. And so here they are with the house here in the background. These are some of the really hard workers, and documenting everything. So they really are contributing to the science as well. They're not just hacking away, but they're documenting everything. When there's something broken, they take a cast so we know everything about the biography. And here you see some of these, how this boat is gradually developing. And this is the plate that we made. This is the result. This is a plate, one of the first really finished one, with the canoe in this spot. By talking with this whole group, we have come to the conclusion that it's impossible to move these big logs. So you have to build this canoe where you take this tree. Well, trees like this, and we chose an oak, and partially because we do find oak trees, oak dugouts in that specific period, they only grow further into a wood. They don't grow on the edge of it, they grow further inland because they have to be straight, and they only become straight, not at the edge of the wood. So they're also not available in this coastal area. The people must have gone a little bit further inland, where they could find these big, large oaks, because these huge oaks are not growing in either the dune areas and not on the levees, not in this landscape where these sites were located. So we drew it in the autumn, because in the autumn it's a good, according to the wood people, it's not the only possible season to do so, but it's the best season, according to them, to cut a log like that. It also is a good time because it doesn't interfere with agricultural activities. It's a good time because you can, at the same time, when you go all the way inland with your canoe to build some new ones, you can collect other sources. It's a place where you can hunt. It's in the autumn, of course, is a good time to hunt because all the furs are better, the animals are fed. It's also a time to collect nuts and all sorts of other resources, which in these newly built canoes that they built on the spot where they cut the tree, they can bring back all these resources. In the back, you see a little hut. We do find these little huts in archaeological context. So we know that they also had not only larger houses, but they also had these most likely more temporary settlements. So that's the narrative behind the choices of this plate. And here in the back is where the water is. So they have to go, they have to pull it some way. But when it's a boat, when it's a dugout, it's a lot less heavier than when it's a log. A log is impossible to move. Okay, so by means of this, I'm thinking about this dugout, but also on the basis of different kinds of flints that we do find and where they are from. It's one important thing. Many different people have looked at this particular, at the flint from this particular culture. And we now want to have one set of eyes. It's Lasse van den Dickenberg, the PhD. He's going to look at, from a comparative point of view, to samples from all these different sites to see what the variability is and where things could have come from in order to understand the relationship between these sites here in this wetland environment with, for example, here, in this place here, is where we find Vlaardingen pottery. Up here, we find corded ware pottery, but we also find a site with so-called Vlaardingen pottery. So everything is based on this pottery typology, but we want to know a little bit more what is actually happening apart from these links that you find between the TOB here, later the corded ware, between the more the Senoese Marde culture down here. So what kind of relationships were there? So all this stuff is going to be put into social media by an organization called XArc. It's an organization that brings together all the open air centers in Europe initially. Now they're also involved in America and other places. They're going to invite people in their social media group to give comments on what we post. And so this empty house, we hope eventually to fill. This is a photo made by Frank Wiersema in the Hunebed Center in Drenthe. And you see it's a very, very full house. And we want to make this a little bit more full as well. So that's one of our objectives, to make reasoned choices as to what to put in these houses and how to furnish it. And we need input from a lot of people to do that. I think, okay, this is the last. So we work a lot together with Masamuda, the open air center where this house is built, and with their volunteers. And so the gains for them, for us, it's getting a lot more knowledge about the Vlamingen culture, which for us archaeologists is very important and very interesting and nice. But for them, they will get furnishing, their house will be furnished more, they will have a lot more information to tell about this particular period and the house, what happened in the house, etc. But they also will have developed a lot of skills, crafts. They can choose what they want to do. They got these people that are now working on the canoe every weekend. Every weekend they work Wednesday afternoon, Saturday and Sunday. They're absolutely amazingly devoted to do this every week. And it has to rain really hard when they stop. So they're really involved in this whole project. And so they get all these things. That yard will be more fully furnished, so we will build things there. And the knowledge they obtain, the skills they obtain, they can pass on to all these school kids that come from the region. And there's a lot of school classes that come there. We also help branding this center and to help for the publicity. We will make an international conference where people like the people working in Masamuda, but also people working in other open air centers will be brought together with scientists. So we hope to bring back science and education together. And for us academics, I think it's really important to open our minds, getting new insights, getting new inspiration. And so, I think that's why this is such a nice project. So you can follow us, and on XArc there's posts. We are a little bit behind in our website at the moment due to all sorts of circumstances, but we are going to fill that more. And so I think that's all. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that splendid lecture, and a very fitting one for this joint session of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. And I should have said this earlier, and my apologies for not doing so. The Prehistoric Society were also represented this evening. We have an opportunity now for a few questions. We can do this in the room, and Simon is monitoring things coming in on chat on the Zoom function. So please, may I have your questions? Alison.
Thank you. Do I need the microphone?
Yes. I have to hold it.
Okay. Congratulations, Annelou. This was such a thrilling project. And it's wonderful to see all the different kinds of techniques of analysis that you have applied. Do you have any advice to people when they excavate material? For example, if you want to do microwear analysis on bone tools, do you have do's and don'ts? So, for example, don't scrub it with a toothbrush or that kind of advice.
That's one thing. Yes, I think it's a real pity that people immediately start to handle objects. So certainly special objects, I think we should wear more gloves when we excavate and take more samples. Clean a little less until you have until analysis is done. I think that's also something we archaeologists we are pretty manic about getting everything clean, which is very good because in museums we don't want something caked with sediments. But before we do so, I think it is important that people think about what kind of questions they expect. And but yeah, there's also I'm totally aware that there's always a balance now with commercial work between what we scientists ideally would like and what is still feasible in terms of money and time. So I think it's important to involve the scientists immediately in the planning and then make a nice compromise.
Yeah, go ahead.
And a follow-up question. It's wonderful to see your microware analysis of bone and antler tools, because that is a field where it's great to see more work being done. So not as much has been done on this as on other materials. Are you also doing organic residue analysis on bone and antler artifacts?
Well, we always look for residue. We haven't really. It's a good point. Maybe I should contact Oliver and ask what he thinks about that. At the moment, we have concentrated on the pottery because of the interest in food, but I'm very interested also in coloring and in dyes. And so together with Ineke Joosten of the RCA, she has the laboratory for the State Service, State Archaeological Service. We are going to try to see whether we can see, for example, evidence for dyes and colorings on these bone tools, because it's with her that we are going to do the bone tools. And so yes, to some extent, but focus more on coloring agents and see whether we can anything to do with that.
Thank you very much for that lecture, Annelou. I really, really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the variety of approaches. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the skills that developed over the course of, starting building the Hoostervold house. Did you have people come in who already knew a little bit about wielding axes to teach the students, or how quickly did the students kind of learn to use a tool in one way and not another, and how often did they break the tools? And did that all reduce over time, or?
Well, first of all, I think I showed a picture of my two partners in crime. Leo Wolterbeek, he's been building loads of prehistoric houses. He knows everything about wood and about. He never did that with stone tools, but ever since hooking up with our projects, he's been very dedicated to that, and he's an excellent, and he teaches everybody. So before we started on the dugout, we had a teaching weekend in which we showed them exactly how to, because you have to go at an angle. You can't just work a stone X exactly the same as a metal X. So they all get taught how to do it. And then you see differences. Some people, don't seem to really get the knack of it. Whereas in Horsterwold, we had a girl. She was the best chopper of anybody. I mean, she just went for it, and she was fast and never had. So it depends a bit on the motor. So I think there's a great difference between people, whether they learn something fast, for example, chopping with an axe, whether they learn that fast or. So I don't think, but I am surprised how quickly they do learn in principle. But there's a great variation.
And okay, so can you see the differences in skill in the wear on the axes? Can you tell if someone's really good at using an axe by the wear created?
Well, they don't break it. That's the most important. I mean, we are actually now a bit frustrated because in the last 2 weeks, 4 axes have broken. And so I think maybe it's now that the end is in sight, that they are trying to get faster. I think it's maybe psychological, because it wasn't happening in the beginning at all. And so, yeah, it's almost done. So you want to go a little, but no, I don't think so. I think it's always very difficult to see the difference between length of use and the skill. So it's mostly the longevity of these axes, whether they last or not, and how much they break.
Thank you very much for that, Annelou. It's great to see how the project's developing. A quick question about adzes and axes. Do you find that adzes and axes used for different tasks, so let's say felling versus sort of finer carpentry work? Do you find that the distribution of traces is different on those, or is it similar with skill? It's not so much.
Well, you can. They're used intermittently, and we are now actually sometimes halfting the same tool as an axe and as an adze, because you can do that with these symmetrical tools as well. And it's going to be, we haven't really looked at those yet to see, but I would imagine that you only see mostly the last use. And, but we still have to look at that. And yeah, now they're using adzes more because they have to thin the edges of from the inside. First they worked on the outside, then we turned the dugout, and now they're hollowing out the inside. And so what they're doing at the moment is thinning out the walls of and you need an adze for that, and an axe is a little less appropriate. So some of the axes are now hafted as adzes to allow that movement.
I've got a couple of questions online. One's from Marlena Wald, and she asks, I have a question about the plant food residues. Are your 2 investigators archaeobotanists?
One is, Lucy Kubbiak is an archaeobotanist. Oliver Craig is an archaeological chemist in archaeological chemistry. But they do this totally together. It's a joint project, and so it's not. And I think that's what the strength is of this approach, is that it's not one or the other. They're really working together and doing the same samples and looking at the same stuff.
And I have another one from online from Richard Kay. Did you use nettle cordage, etc., in addition to lime bark?
We have we have used no nettle cordage in the house in the construction. We have used strips of rawhide, and which has, if you use that, sometimes the mice get it, but at the Vlaardingen house it seems to be okay. We like lime because it gives a little bit of a flexibility to the house, which. If it's too much, then you get the problems we have now. By the way, this is the house, and so the wind came here on the side and pushed the house that direction. That's what's happening. So so we're going to try to pull it back. And the ropes that are now being made, I think, are of willow bast. But yeah, you can use a nettle rope for lots of things, and we make them. But we haven't really used them for the house construction.
I wonder if I can ask a more general question about the houses in relation to kind of the whole gamut of crafts you've mentioned. Quite a lot of the work is obviously being done outside. Are craft activities practical within the buildings? If so, which ones? Or are light levels a problem inside these, well, they're really quite gloomy buildings inside as they appear from the 2 that you've reconstructed? or are people quite happy in the winter working inside and carrying out the range of activities?
Well, it's an interesting question you put, because maybe I should, I can go back, I think. I want to go back to the house plan, because it's a question we have put ourselves as well. And in the first house, we actually found we interpreted the house plan in a different way from the second house. Here's the house plan, here. And you see that here the wall posts, that's pretty clear, but there are many. But inside, there's a whole row of little stakes. And in the first house, this house, the Horst de Wold house, we actually built the wall over there. We used those to make the wall. And you see that they disappear at the end here. At the end, these rows of stakes disappear. And what we did there, we left the house open. So we didn't build a wall there. And we made movable screens that in the summer, when it wasn't very cold, we took away the screens with the skins, and we had an open, very light workplace there. In the second house, we didn't do that. But so that's a way of interpreting your house plan. So it's true, it is dark, but yeah, you do get used to darkness, first of all, and through the walls stuff, you get some light. But I found that area here in the front, so it is about this area as a craft area, very, very nice. And so, yeah, I don't know whether...
Yeah. And the distribution of small finds on other excavated sites, do they bear out the idea that different sectors within the building are used differently?
So far, we haven't really found a lot of them. This house plan was excavated in 1959, and it wasn't really done very well. So we chose it because it's one of the few which was not overlain by other house plans. So we had a complete house, but we now think that some of these posts are actually repair, that they're not contemporaneous. But in later sites like the site Den Haag-Steinhof, they haven't really found very clear activity areas. And I think that idea comes also a little bit from more temporary hunter-gatherer sites where you... So, yes, it's not really clear. It's mixed. So we don't have like the hide working tools outside. In the LBK, we have a site, Elslo, where you do find the hide working tools at a little bit away from the main settlement. In these sites, we haven't really clear evidence for that.
Thank you.
So,
I wonder if I can pass over to Dr. Knight for the vote of thanks tonight.
you have to sit down.
Hello, my name's Matthew Knight. I'm the meeting secretary for the Prehistoric Society. Oh, I can remove my mask. Yes, I am the meeting secretary for the Prehistoric Society, and it is a pleasure to be giving the vote of thanks tonight on behalf of both the Prehistoric Society and the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. First of all, I need to thank National Museum Scotland for providing the venue for tonight. Also Chris for doing all of the AV work for us, and Mallard for facilitating the online presentation for everyone watching at home. From the perspective of the societies, I'd like to specifically thank Andrea, Jade and Simon for helping facilitate and promote the lecture. And last of all, and most importantly, I'd like to thank Professor Annelou van Gijn for travelling over from the Netherlands and delivering such a wonderful lecture. As she said earlier, we tried to get this lecture 2 years ago, so it's been some time in the making, and it did not disappoint. So I'd like you all to join me in a round of applause, thanking Annelou for a fantastic lecture. And good night to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And the next Society of Antiquaries of Scotland lecture then, Thursday, the 28th of April. Watch out for further notification about that. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.